joined today by Martha Ardiomenko. Thank you so much for joining us, Martha. Yeah, I'm so excited to hear your story. Why don't we just kind of start from the top? How did you get involved with the stay-at-home daughter movement?
Well, my family was a little different than some of them because they were not like super hardcore into like, oh, girls need to stay at home all the time. So we kind of, but all our friends were. So, parents, they tend to be, well, this must be the right thing. So we kind of went through this transition of, I'm preparing to always dreaming of going to college and those kind of things to no, it's not a good idea and you can't go.
Okay.
you
Sure.
know and I think that was really hard for me because I was a very education driven person. I didn't want to get married. I wanted to be a missionary and go to nursing school. So it was hard for me to wrap my head around this is the only right way to be at home and be when we went to Bill Gothard's seminars, the basic life seminars. And I kept asking a lot of questions because I'm like, I just don't see this in the Bible. Like you have to listen to your parents and everything. And even after you get married, if they tell you not to go to a certain church, you shouldn't go.
Sure. Wow.
And, and most of our friends were that way. So it was hard because I was kind of labeled as maybe more rebellious because I didn't just accept it. But it definitely impacted my life because then when I was working at the library from 16 to 18.
Okay.
And but a friend, so they had come and they were like, you shouldn't be working outside the home, even though my parents had wanted me to because they needed me to pay my car insurance. And so I had to go in and tell them that I was quitting. And we were going to supposedly have like a family business and I was supposed to work with the family and do those kind of things. I was really pressured to be thinking about getting married.
At 18?
Yeah. Well,
sure.
This was even before that, 17. It was like, you should be thinking about who you can marry. And we lived in Libby. So there wasn't a lot of people.
Right. Not a lot of options to choose from.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking, yeah, no, this is not going to work. Well, my ex-husband's brother, he lived with us.
Okay.
At that point, and he lived with us for about 9 months. And even though his family had gone back to Minnesota, he was still with us. And so his brother had come to visit a couple times. And it was it's a very weird story, but it was basically a step above an arranged marriage.
Okay. So
I didn't know him.
Okay.
I had met him 2 months before.
Before you got married?
Yeah, or 4 months before. And then we were engaged for 2 months before we got married.
And is this a long distance relationship for those 2 months?
Yeah, he was in Minnesota.
Okay.
He lived in Minnesota. He came out to visit once, and then about 4 weeks before we got married, he came out to see us.
Okay. So I don't want to jump too far ahead. But walk me through because, it seems like everyone I interview in this movement has a different courtship, dating
Yeah.
experience. And that oftentimes is tied into the ideology of the stay-at-home daughter movement. Like it kind of
Yeah.
feels like it goes hand in hand. What
Hmm.
was this time like? I mean, did you guys go on dates? Did you have phone calls with each other? Or was it very much like you are just, your parents picked him out, he's good, you're going
Yeah, and
for it?
actually my parents didn't really pick him out as much as his brother did.
Okay.
Um, and then my parents, they were like, okay, we'll go along with it. Um, but so, you're involved in there was this huge push at that point in the 90s to, courtship, stay at home daughters, the good parents, they do this stuff.
Okay.
You take care of and kind of dictate your children's lives. There was Bill Gothard, and we were not quite, we didn't fit quite into all their boxes to do like ATI.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of it though with my friends,
Okay.
their parents. Um, so, and we, so I think as far as like courtship, we didn't really even have a courting time period because we were never alone together ever.
Okay.
Um, we, one time I think we sat on the stairs alone together, and my mom said that she thought that would be a good idea so that maybe we could talk, and she got in trouble for
Oh, your
letting us
mom got
do
in
that.
trouble with,
Yeah.
now when you say your
With
mom got in trouble, is she getting in
Yeah.
trouble with her church or like her friends? I mean, who?
Technically our church, yeah,
Mhm.
it was we had it was like a home church, but it was we had like a lot of rules, very detailed
Sure.
rules that we had to follow and agree to. Um, so she, got lectured and told you never ever do that again. Basically it was akin to, you know, um, on the road to adultery or, you know,
So,
whatever.
sure, sure. So for someone that maybe has not like experienced
Mhm.
this or grown up in the same
Yeah.
circles as you, can you just define the stay-at-home daughter movement, in a nutshell to somebody that's never heard of it before?
Yeah. So for in my experience, it was the parents said, that basically women were more at risk if they were going out into the world and doing putting coming out from underneath the umbrella of their parents, and especially their father. Um, and that the mother and the daughters especially needed to stay underneath the authority of their father. If they went out and got a job or went to school or whatever, they would be underneath someone else's authority, and that would cause problems. So when you have that pressure, though, from all these outside people who look really good, they've got amazing families, they're having these our daughters, they waited till their dad found them this amazing mate. Now they're happy. They have courtship, good courtship stories, all these different things. You start to want it. You think,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that looks really good. I got homeschool newsletters, and magazines, and and they would put stories in there about, this is what we're doing. We're teaching piano lessons at home, or we're helping with our dad's, business. And so the one thing I remember my mom though saying that she had a lot of problems with was because her dad died when she was 12.
Okay.
And her mom was widowed. And so she had to take care of, their family.
Uh-huh.
And she said, you should always have something that you can take care of the family if there was a problem, like if
Okay.
you lost a spouse. And that was not something that was really addressed very well. It was more like, well, get life insurance.
Okay. But
And so we felt like there was some, there was some details that were left out, and they were like, that's a really rare thing that doesn't happen very often, that
Sure.
you have to do it, or you'll just have to find a new person to marry.
Oh, okay.
Right. And hopefully at that point your parents will help you find that again.
So even a second marriage, they're like, we still would be involved. And yeah.
So like one of my very good friends, they were definitely like, they didn't really do, like, you would go shopping or anything. It was like, oh, I need to go ask my dad.
Oh, wow.
I need to, and even later, I remember one of them, she had a baby when she wasn't married. And like her dad and her brothers were there when she had her baby.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a little odd.
I can't, I can't really,
but she was like, well, I don't have a husband and I need them there to be praying for me and to be there, and that was very different. I kind of like, oh, okay, I don't know about this.
So when did you first, because you said you were kind of asking questions even at like an ATI conference, when did you start questioning it where you were like, I don't know if this makes sense?
I was always kind of a questioner. I think it was, I didn't stop as much until after I got married. You don't have as much energy for questions.
Sure.
When there's a lot of other problems going on in life. And so, I kind of stopped saying them out loud because I was tired of, getting in trouble basically for it or lectured. And
right.
So I'm not sure where you want to go with that next, but I think our family was, because it was so different, we didn't quite fit into all the boxes. It happened a little later for me, where like my younger siblings, it impacted them more. But almost in a good way, because when my mom saw my next sister and I and what happened, she said, I don't think this is right.
Okay, so your mom was the one that kind of got the change of heart.
And
sure.
She said, I think it's a good idea to encourage them to get more education,
right.
To kind of experience other things besides just wish for marriage. And living in your father's house, like she said, I just don't see it.
Sure.
Right.
Now, did they have a particular verse, or you mentioned ATI as being kind of a driving force for these ideas, but was there anyone else, besides your church, that was propagating it? And then what were they using? Were they using a specific scripture or something to justify it?
I'm trying to remember some of them. I mean, we had a lot of different Bible verses that they would, talk about, but it was kind of, the story of Dinah was always brought up, that she went out to see the land and she came out from underneath her dad's authority and then she got raped. And so, basically, I mean, I had one friend that told me that her daughter never went to a store ever without her brother or her dad, because otherwise she'd be raped.
Wow.
And it perpetuated a lot of fear when you're hearing that.
Yeah.
I remember I had a panic attack at one point because our car broke down. Our van had broken down, and they usually never will pull a car with people in it, but it was way below zero outside, and they decided they were going to do it, but some people had to ride with the tow truck driver.
Okay.
And so they said, one of the men said, okay, I want you and you to go in the tow truck. And I freaked out because you're hearing like, you're not alone with a man that you don't know ever.
Yeah.
And you're telling me to ride in the tow truck, and they were kind of frustrated with me.
Yeah.
But in their minds, it was just, it had to be done. And why are you freaking out
Yeah.
about
They have no
this?
idea, I'm sure.
Yeah, but they had been teaching us that for months, for years. You're not alone with a man, or else it's basically your fault if something happens. And so
Okay.
I think that was, I mean, when I think about Bible verses, that was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
That girls, they're more at risk. And everything was, even before like more the stay-at-home daughter movement, everything was in the way you dress, the way you talk. You had to think about, are you going to be coming to harm because you dressed the wrong way? Your
Okay.
dress wasn't long enough. Your hair, you spent too much time on your hair. And you're talking about like Mennonite type clothes.
Sure. Sure. So you
Oh,
were
we're
not
not.
wearing anything that would be
No, I mean,
considered.
I'm like
Yeah.
wearing like cotton calico dresses that are down to my ankles,
Mm-hmm.
and and being told that my dress wasn't long enough, and therefore I was responsible for someone's evil thoughts. You know,
Was there ever
and
any responsibility put onto the men? Like, were the men ever told, you're responsible for your actions if you do something towards a woman not appropriate?
not generally. I mean, it was kind of like, yeah, that's not good, but they shouldn't have been doing A through C.
Mm-hmm.
you know. So it was kind of like, well, yeah, it's not good, but they need to get married was
Okay.
one. Um, I heard that a lot. Like if they're having like tempting thoughts and stuff, oh, they just need to get married so they can have sex.
And did that fix it?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Probably not. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about how this affected your relationship with your mom. Did it cause extra strain? I mean, was there like fighting going on between you two over this, or was it, still okay?
My mom and I were really close. She was only 17 when she had me, so
Oh,
we're
yeah.
not that far apart in age. Um, and so I think the biggest thing with us is we got really quiet. We didn't talk to each other
Mm-hmm.
because we were worried about what would happen if we said the wrong thing. And I think that impacted our relationship in that time, because you don't, if you're concerned about, well, everything needs to go through the men, then you were worried about talking between yourselves, even with my mom and I. And we talked
Interesting.
about everything. And so it did impact that part of it. When I did start having children, it gave us something safe that we could talk about that hopefully they weren't going to be upset about.
Okay.
But it definitely, I think what happens is that you have the stay-at-home daughter movement, and it just impacts all these other things that go into other places.
Sure.
So the women being oppressed, and being like, you can't think for yourself, you can't talk for yourself, you can't almost read the Bible for yourself. You need to make sure that everything goes through a man.
Yeah.
It caused problems with our other female relationships.
Because you feel like you can't be honest with them.
Yeah. Or even you're laughing and talking and whatever, and then one of them would come and say, oh, I'm really sorry that I was so foolish.
Oh, wow.
Because foolish, remember the verse about foolish women
Okay.
going house to house. It's like in the New Testament.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember which one.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was a big push. Like, you have to make sure you're not one of those foolish women. And so if you were happy that was considered to be, well, you must have been being foolish.
Okay.
And so,
So walk me through, you're 18, you've got this guy that his brother's kind of wanting you to marry, you get married. At what point do you realize like this is not like this movement is not working? Maybe I should get a job, maybe I should pursue something else. How did you get out of it?
yeah. So I'm 18. They didn't, so no courting, no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, his brother came to me and said, hey, he'd like to marry you. What do you think about that? So no proposal.
Oh, so he didn't actually propose to you?
No.
Okay.
His brother kind of basically did. And I said,
so stop for just a minute. Why do you think his brother was so passionate about getting him married?
the whole like he needs to get married because he has sexual urges
Okay.
is really the key thing. And
Right.
I didn't really know that at that point because I'm 18. I've lived in a sheltered household that,
Sure.
I didn't grow up with TV or, normal things. And
Right.
I was fairly well educated, but you're very sheltered.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't realize those kind of things. And
So what was your reaction when his brother said, do you want to marry him?
I was kind of shocked.
Sure.
I didn't know this guy. He barely spoke English.
Yeah.
Like we had spoken to each other maybe 5 times in passing.
Yeah.
So, and the rule in the church is that if somebody asked like to marry you, you weren't allowed to talk to anyone about it. You had to make the decision before you could talk to anyone about it, even your parents.
Wow. So they didn't really, I'm just thinking that
my dad did know. And so I did, but I wasn't really supposed to talk to him. They had to ask my dad first. And so they have done that. So it was not quite exactly like a lot of the ATI type of courtships where the dad
chooses
deals with it all.
Yeah.
But it was similar, it was kind of it was a weird Russian tradition kind of more.
Okay.
And so we were trying to wrap our heads around that too, because we're American that have done the courtship thing, you talk to the dad and this, and they're saying, oh no, you can't talk to anyone about it. And so my answer to him was, what happens if I say yes?
Yeah.
And I felt like the world kind of imploded. They all just assumed I said yes.
Oh.
And
was this partly the language barrier, do you think?
At that point, maybe. But his family, next thing I know, I'm engaged. And they're planning a wedding.
Does he give you a ring?
No ring. Okay. And still I hadn't really talked to him very much. And then they said, well, we don't believe in long engagements because it's very easy to get tempted.
I remember hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to get married in, a couple months.
And this is his family that's telling you this.
Mm-hmm.
What is your family's reaction at this point?
I remember they were asking me like, okay, is this something you really want to do? And I said, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so we were in Minnesota at that point, and we started driving home, and the motorhome that we were in broke down, and so we were stuck there for a little while in Fargo. And he had called me, and he said, my mom is really worried that about me coming out to Montana, because he was supposed to come out to Montana in a couple of weeks so we could get to know each other a little bit better.
Sure.
And my mom is really worried about it. So I'm not going to come until like 2 days before the wedding.
Did
And
he say
she's also,
why?
because of temptation. It's going to be too much temptation. And that was the first time I spoke up, and I said, if you don't come out in a week or two, we're not getting married.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I always wonder, like, one, like why I had the strength to realize that was
right. Like you're
wrong.
seeing some red flags.
Yeah, I was seeing the red flags, but I wasn't responding like I should have responded more to them. I think a lot of it was the adults in my life. They kind of just were like, oh, I guess this is the right thing. And they just kind of stood back.
Right.
Including my parents. Like, I think they were like, I guess it's fine, you know?
Yeah.
So that was in February, and we got married in April.
So he did come out.
He came out about 3 or 4 weeks before.
Okay.
And still though, like there was like 17 people living in the house.
Okay.
So you even if you wanted to be alone, you couldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, it was very dictated, very, you know, and I had seen a couple of other red flags that had happened.
Sure.
During even that couple of weeks that made me really wonder, like, I'm not sure if this is the right thing.
Did you talk to anyone and say, I don't know?
I was really scared.
Mm-hmm.
And I was scared because I felt like, well, women, you're not supposed to know. Like, maybe I'm not hearing right. They're all on board with this. My dad seems fine with it. You know, Sergey, my brother-in-law, he seemed fine with it.
Sure.
So I decided to fast and pray, and then I got very, very sick.
Okay. Right. Because you're not eating.
I wasn't eating, and I think my immune system was just really bad. Now I believe I got mono.
Okay.
Possibly combined, like it was like influenza, and then it went into that. So the day before my wedding, I had a fever of 104.
Oh my.
And I had no voice. And my aunt and uncle, they had come for the wedding, and they were the first people that said, well, not the first, but they said, are you sure, you know, that you want to do this? Like, you're really sick.
Yeah, exactly.
And it seemed like nobody else really was asking that.
Right.
And I had no voice. I couldn't even respond. I remember just smiling, like
wow.
sitting there. I had 3 other people that had contacted me, that knew me, and just say, you know, I don't feel right about this. Like, what are you doing? Are you sure this is what you want to do? My grandparents were one, and then 2 other family friends that had known me for a long time. And I was always grateful that they at least were brave enough to do that, because it's really hard if you see someone getting married that you're like, I don't think this is right, to go and tell them that.
Right.
It's really hard.
So did you what was your response then to them?
My grandparents, I kind of just, you know, said, well, I guess I'm doing it, you know, kind of thing. And they, well, we're going to love you and support you no matter what, kind of thing.
Right.
I remember my grandpa changed the subject. My grandma liked to push, and
yeah.
my grandpa was like, so how's your cow?
It's like, this is awkward.
Yeah. So, but the rest of like the other family, they came to me in person and talked to us. And I just didn't say anything. I let my dad talk.
Sure.
And they told me, you know, like they loved me and stuff, but they couldn't come to the wedding.
Okay.
And the man in that family, he passed away about a month later. He was killed in a mill accident.
Okay.
So I don't know, like, if he would have tried to do more after that.
Right.
Because their family kind of was torn apart, like, with
Sure.
a traumatic death right after that. And the other family was one that was kind of like my second parents, and they lived far away, and they called, and they were like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, exactly.
you know? And so I didn't really hear from them very much after that for quite a long time.
Okay. And you told them at that point, what was your response when they asked you,
I kind of just laughed it off. I didn't really say much.
Sure.
I was worried, like, you're thinking you're doing what's God's will.
Mm-hmm.
That was the big thing. So I felt like if I spoke against it, I'm speaking against God. And I
Right.
think that's one of the main facets of this whole belief system.
Right.
You're trying to please God, and these man-made rules with a doctrine of basically, if you do everything right, if you submit to your dad, you submit to your, family members, like the right way, you're going to be blessed. This
Right.
prosperity gospel of this.
Right.
And so
what's the wedding like?
so
You're super sick the day before. Do you
I'm
make
very
it
sick.
up the aisle?
I take Tylenol or something, trying to get the inflammation down in my voice.
Sure.
And I remember I got dressed. I couldn't walk down like a traditional aisle because I was worried I'd pass out.
Oh no. Yeah.
And then the man that did the ceremony, he was from Canada. He spoke like 4 different languages and was very full of himself.
Okay.
And he preached this very long sermon and translated it himself into Russian.
Okay. So like twice as long because we have to do.
Yeah. So it was like 2 hours.
And you were just standing there the whole time?
And I'm standing there. And at one point I remember hitting the wall because I was blacking out.
Oh no.
And then someone brought me a chair.
Okay.
Because we were standing. And I think all of us, because my dad had been sick too, and my sister, and so we were all like fading.
Yeah, exactly.
So we weren't thinking so much about the wedding ceremony, just getting conscious.
Just trying to literally make it through the day.
Yeah. The only thing I remember from the ceremony sermon was he said, "So if your wife and your donkey fall into the river, you need to save your wife and not the donkey."
Which, okay.
I remember thinking, isn't that assumed?
Like, why is this a question? Exactly.
Yeah, why is this like, being talked about? But that was the only thing I remembered. Well, he was so into his sermon, he forgot to do wedding vows.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So you got married without him?
Yeah. So then they had the parents come up and like lay hands on us and pray for us. And that was it. No, kiss.
But a first kiss, right?
No, we didn't do
no kissing. Okay.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, okay, that this is weird, but I don't feel very good. So of course you're not speaking up very much.
Right.
And of course I had been teaching myself, not to speak up.
Right.
And it just kind of went downhill from there.
So the honeymoon was not good.
No, it was not good. And he had very twisted ideas of what marriage should look like. And likely from porn use or the like. And so it was here, I'm somebody who's very sheltered, very, so I end up going to like a bookstore and I'm looking at trying to find marriage books to figure out like what on earth am I supposed to be doing? because
Right.
I'm too embarrassed to ask someone because I think I should know this, right?
Right.
Everyone should know how to do sex and know these things. And I knew all the mechanics. Like I
Right.
wasn't sheltered in that way, but it was more, I didn't understand what perversion and that kind of stuff was. Like
Okay.
that I was not there. Um he wasn't, and his brother, so he's like trying to be counselor, I guess.
Oh, the
But
brother. Sure.
yeah, but I think we've been married only a couple months, and we were going to get paint at the hardware store, and walking to the hardware store, and I walked in front of him,
Oh, okay.
and I heard, I think, probably 30-minute, 40-minute lecture on why you should never walk in front of your husband.
And why was that?
It was very disrespectful. It was disrespecting his authority and his, place in the house. And you're like showing that you're in charge, not him. And so you needed to make sure that you were always thinking and aware of where you were, what you were doing, how you were talking. And that's why I was saying it starts with like the stay-at-home daughter thing, and then it
Right.
went into that sort of thing, and it just got worse from there.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up moving to Minnesota, and the church there kind of built on that and got worse
Okay.
and worse as it went along.
Okay.
When I left, Fred had decided that he wanted to move back to Montana because they were telling him what to do a lot, and he didn't
Sure.
like that. And it wasn't probably for the right reasons, but it did get us out of there.
Okay.
And we came back to Montana, and I joined some online groups, email groups,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was called the Patriarch's Wives.
Okay.
And it was very involved.
Like they were proud of being.
Yes.
Okay.
And it was very involved with like Vision Forum.
Oh, right.
And Doug Phillips, and they're friends with them, like R.C. Sproul Jr. and a lot of these big names. That
Sure.
Those were people that they knew, and so I think it actually helped me though to start questioning things, because I'm reading what they're writing and I start asking questions like,
Right.
But what about this? And I've experienced this. How is this right? And we had some good discussion.
So were there people in the group, the email group, that were telling you, no, that's not right, like that doesn't seem right? Were you getting any?
Most of it was not, and they were really intense on the stay-at-home daughter. Like their girls, they were going to stay home. They wanted these amazing courtships, and I'm saying, it doesn't always go well.
Sure.
Like I start telling them stories about like, well, my friends, they did this, they did everything right, and this is happening to them.
And what is their response back?
Well, that's rare.
Okay.
Was generally the response.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started, and Fred was having a lot of mental health issues.
Sure.
And so I'm thinking I have to try to figure out like how to make money. I got to do different things. And here now, because I didn't go and get any more education, I'm kind of stuck.
So at this point, you're still with him, but he's not able to provide.
He's not working very well. Yeah. So I would think when we came back to Montana, I was pregnant with my third son.
Okay.
And so I went before I had Tony, I got trained as an EMT.
Okay.
And
And your husband's supportive of this, or?
He didn't really care. He didn't
Sure.
really, he was kind of out of it, like didn't really pay much attention to any of us.
Right.
Unless, it was just his mental health stuff. And he just, the only thing he really liked, to be very blunt, he only cared about sex. So that was pretty much the only thing he cared about. He didn't really, as long as I took care of the kids and whatever, he was fine. And at that, we had really cheap rent. And so we made it work. But his mental health was going downhill a lot. And so I went, when I decided to move to Kalispell. He was in Minnesota. They were trying to help. They figured if they prayed enough that he'd get better.
Okay. So mental health treatment.
Yeah, wasn't really an option.
Right.
And so they had taken him back to Minnesota and then up to Alaska. And they were hoping, if they prayed for him, he'd be delivered. And, his family, because I was American, he was Russian, they figured it was probably my fault because he had never had issues in their minds until he got married.
Okay. So how long is this time frame that he's away, trying to get healed and you're in Montana?
So we went back and forth a little bit, but he was gone, I think, for a good, when he had his last major breakdown, I found out I was pregnant with Tony in November. He had it December. He was gone until April.
Oh, wow. So a good stretch of time.
Yeah. And so I moved to Kalispell during that time because there was a Russian church down here. And I thought, oh, well, when he comes back, he'll have good support. We'll do better. And he continued to go downhill until June. I took him to the emergency room and we had a hold against his will. We had to go to court and have a mental health evaluation, and he went to Warm Springs then.
Okay. And he was gone for?
From June until November.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when he comes back?
Yeah. So he came back in November, and I didn't know if he was ever coming back. I mean, he was pretty upset, when he left, of course. And so I'm facing the church that I was involved with. They told me that it was my fault because I didn't move to Alaska when they had told me to.
And this is a church here in Kalispell?
No, it was the one that I had been a part of in Minnesota.
Okay, right.
And so, but I didn't feel peaceful about that. I'm like, they haven't helped us in this whole time period. They've always kind of, so I'm having all these questions. Right. So it basically, though, you take all these beliefs of, well, if you do everything right, you don't date. Right. You listen to your parents. You're going to have a perfect marriage with blessed children, and everything will go right. And nothing is going right like that. Right. So I'm like, my husband's in a mental hospital. I just had my fourth son. No one wants to hire me now because not only do I not have anything more than a high school education, I have no work experience at all. Right. Right. The jobs that I can get are minimum wage. I can't pay rent and childcare for 4 children under 6. Yeah. If I can get someone to hire me with all those children. Exactly. People look at you and go, you're a risk. So I started doing, and I would ask the people like on my email group, okay, what do I do? Well, maybe in your case, it's okay to get a job, but you should really try to like do something from home.
So even at this point, they're questioning your decision to get a job.
Work. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pay the rent next month.
Yeah.
Like, what am I supposed to do? Well, have you asked the church? Well, my church is, I'm between churches. So I start visiting all the churches in Kalispell.
Yeah.
And they're kind of looking at you like, what, you're here with all these little kids.
Right.
Where's your husband?
Do they ask you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, one church, I went to one that was more conservative, and they kind of basically told me they didn't think it was the right church for me because he wasn't around, because you really needed the husband to be involved, and that I should look for other friends.
Wow.
Because I didn't really fit their model.
Okay.
And so that was hard. And when I started going to Harvest, where Night Week Family.
Yep.
It was because I had gotten a postcard in the mail because I had done MOPS at East Haven.
Okay.
And they were doing a kids program.
Right.
At the Stillwater. And so when they were starting, and so it started on the morning that Tony was born.
Okay.
So Tony was born at like 8:30 or 8:15, and it started at 8:30. So
you drove them all over there?
No, so my friend, like, I have the baby, he brings Paul in and says, "Here, look at your new brother," and then took him out the door to this kids program.
Yeah.
And she gets there and she says, "Oh," they say, "Where's his mom?" "Oh, she can't come. She just had a baby." "Oh, when did she have the baby?" "Oh, like 20 minutes ago." "Oh."
They're probably like, "What?"
She just had a baby. And I think it was Brenda Buckner.
Oh, yeah.
And so she was a little shocked, like, "Oh, wow, that's funny."
Sure.
So I started going there, but I had so many questions.
Right.
Like, about my faith at that point. Am I doing things wrong? Am I doing things right? All these things that I've been taught. Everybody's telling me you did everything right, but nothing's happening like they said it would. So what else did they tell me wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at this point, you're still, now your husband has gotten, so he's not with you at this point.
No, he wasn't there until later, when we got in November. When he came back, he was in and out, like they had him in a safe house, and then he would come home. And so I was dealing with other things in my life, like the landlord wasn't happy that I had all those kids in the apartment.
Right.
And so she really encouraged us to move, basically harassing me.
Right.
I would move. She's the one that made me go into property management.
Oh, sure.
I figured I could do better.
You could be a nicer landlord.
She's definitely a interesting person. But you have those experiences. But in the middle of it, I had little like messages from God that kind of made me realize, okay, man has created all these ideals.
Right.
Give these perfect things, but this is not actually what God says and what the Bible says. So it started bringing me back to like looking at it. What do those verses actually say?
Right.
And it was a long period of time. But I had I was able to buy a mobile home without an income,
right,
without any money, and it was a miracle, that I was able to do that. But God really, was able to bring that about, and it helped increase my faith.
Sure.
In those little things that he was providing for me.
Right.
I had money that would appear in my mailbox that I still don't know where it came from. People, strangers that mailed me money.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't understand this, but it was kind of like that widow's mite of, I had just had faith, and I had to have faith and pray.
Right.
That he was going to provide for me, because I was willing to work, but it wasn't happening. I worked for a magazine. I did advertising and marketing, and I worked for doing whirlpool demonstrations at Costco.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Well, it was at that point, it was $15 an hour.
Yeah, that's pretty good for, that time.
Yeah, that time period. And so, and Fred had come home. And so it was really hard though, because I didn't have childcare.
Yeah.
And he couldn't really watch them. So it was more Paul watching them.
Yeah.
Which he was like 6, 7.
Okay. So you're leaving him home with your husband, but he's not
really.
Yeah.
And he's like falling asleep, and
yeah.
Not like he wasn't watching them. So, but they would bring the baby to me to nurse.
Okay.
And I'd go out and
at Costco?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if you remember the old Costco. So
yes.
The doorway, where the doorway came out, they had put the whirlpool people right there.
Okay.
So as everyone's coming out with their receipts,
right,
you're standing there in the middle.
Yep.
And getting run over.
Sure.
And so I'm like,
and you're just nursing a baby right there.
Yeah, I'm like ready to, okay, I'm just doing this, and had to wear blue and tan. And so I only tan skirt I had was like this size 12 skirt. So I had no money. So I took it in, and it did not look great. But I was desperate to make money. But I remember, I think I felt so guilty.
For working?
I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you feel bad because you have to pay your bills.
Exactly.
And so it created this dynamic in your brain of, I'm sinning when there's not really a sin.
Sure.
And saying, okay, God, if this is sin and this is sin, which is the less sin?
Right.
I'm going to pick that one. And, and it trailed down to like birth control was another one of, okay, if I have more children, I can't support them.
Right.
But if I don't have more children, I'm going to go to hell. So, which is worse, because both of them say that you're bad if you don't do.
Yeah. So a lot of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. And so just saying, okay, God, what can I do?
So at what point does that mentality start shifting where you're like, okay, I feel okay about providing for my family?
At that point, it started to shift. It took a little while, to get to that point. It was a gradual thing.
Sure.
But that was definitely a major part of it when I'm having to work, because otherwise we're not going to have food. We're not going to have clothes.
Right.
I'm selling everything that is anything of value in the house. And then Fred did start to work after he had gotten back. After about a year, I think he had started to work and got disability. So that did ease some of it.
Right.
But I was still working part-time to pay for any extra school stuff and that kind of stuff. So.
Right. So that kind of propelled you forward to be able to pursue other, business ventures and things.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's kind of fast forward, to today. So did you eventually, leave the marriage, or what made you make that decision if you did?
Yeah. So, we ended up getting divorced it's been a little over 3 years ago. But it took a while just to come to that conclusion because, you don't get divorced when you're
Right.
raised like I was. And so the trying to I had to really like balance, okay, again, it's starting to be a safety issue here.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do, as
Right.
far as that? And so dealing with the thoughts of, okay, I'm gonna lose all my friends, everybody that has supported me possibly may hate me for this because, or you're
Sure.
also relegated to a life of being alone for the rest of your life, possibly, depending on your belief, the belief.
Right.
A lot of the beliefs that I heard were that way too.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, it's a lot of stuff to wrap around in your head. And he's telling me, I want a divorce. And he'd been doing that for many years.
Okay.
And the abuse had just gotten to a point where I didn't want to live anymore.
Yeah.
And I was again facing those choices of, okay, which is worse? You're staying married for the sake of staying married versus I'm gonna I want to die.
Right.
And so I started seeking help for that and learning what the Bible says about oppression and kind of looking at the Bible for the very first time through different eyes of, wow, I never really saw God actually says this. And he doesn't say women are lower than men to like as far as value.
Sure.
Which was I think it played a huge role in the whole marriage scenario, all the way down to when I just wanted to be done. And so when he left, I still had a hard time wrapping my head around it.
Right.
Just, okay, now I'm working full time.
Yeah.
I'm doing jobs and I constantly, even not in those conservative circles, you hear comments like, well, why are you doing this? Where's your guy? Kind of thing.
Sure.
Why are you talking to the contractor? Why are you telling us what to do?
Yeah. Still that. Yeah, for sure.
You look too young. You look, so, and I think those voices in your head that you're raised with, you should be under someone's authority. And especially for me, because not only, with not having a husband, but my dad he's not a good person and he's gone. He's out of my life.
Right.
And so I don't even have that.
Yeah.
It's not like you can go. And I remember asking someone that was in there, I was like, if you don't have a husband, you don't have a dad, then what are you supposed to do?
Right. And what was her response?
Am I under, and I'm like, aren't I under God's umbrella?
Right.
Well, you should probably find a man in the church that you can,
Sure.
be underneath. So that kind of, I feel like it's idolized to
right.
a point where we've created this own doctrine that sends it just trickles down into every aspect of the life of these people afterwards. And there's some amazing people who have done this and have wonderful marriages, great families. But one of them, I remember her telling me, like, I didn't realize I could ask my husband and ask him questions about a decision he made. And I'm really upset about this decision he made. He had no idea. And then he's upset later when he finds
Right.
out because I didn't express it. And it caused problems in their marriage because she didn't feel like she could ask him, well, why are we eating dinner at 4:00?
Right.
And she's resentful of it. And he's like, well, I thought you wanted to.
Right.
Because
So
you
the
never said
communication
anything.
is
Yeah.
breaking down a
And
lot.
so that's what I'm saying. Like, even in the good marriages, it causes problems
Right.
because you've been taught you don't ask questions, you don't speak up. They're your authority in everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Okay, so a couple other questions, and then we'll probably wrap up. What would you say to someone either that's in the movement or, thinking, man, some of these ideas sound really good. Like I can protect my daughters. They won't have to live in danger, or I can help them find a spouse, or, whatever. What would you say to someone who is considering that?
I would say that when you start living by man's rules rather than God's rules, you always end up with problems. That it can sound really good on the surface. But in the end, that's not how God created us. He created us to be male and female, and yes, to have our own roles. But when we start suppressing or oppressing like one person over another, even in trying to protect, I've seen people who are not even conservative trying to protect and know where their children are at all times.
Right.
It causes a breakdown in the whole structure of a family and impacts your not only those children but your grandchildren and family relationships. And I would say, just be really careful. Like most of the time, I'm not going to go and scare you with a bunch of things, but
sure.
I helped a young man that he wrote a book called, he wrote a blog post first about why courtship is fundamentally flawed.
Okay.
And then he wrote a book that I helped him with too. And he kind of goes into more the science of it, of why this breaks down for the future. And that I might recommend something like that if I thought they were open
to
reading. Like here's people who have tried it. They've actually tried this with all their hearts and why it doesn't work.
Sure.
And so it just kind of depends on the person,
right.
What I would say to them. But generally, if they're pretty gung-ho and really happy, I'm going to smile and say, when you're ready to talk about it,
exactly.
I'm here.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add that I didn't touch on?
I think you covered most of it. Do you see anything else that you want to hear about, or no?
I mean, I could talk to you all day because I'm so intrigued. But it's so fascinating to hear your story. Thank you so much for sharing it. I know it's a little bit like scary to put yourself out there.
Yeah, a little bit.
But I so appreciate it.